Just leave.
Yeah. Oh, I've never had anyone walk out before, but...
We are. Toss-up, pal.
Of their lack of authenticity. It was a relentless, worldwide pile-on. Imagine being Barry, Robin, and Maurice Gibb. You've written hundreds of songs, topped the charts in 3 different decades, and redefined pop music twice. You've written timeless ballads for artists like Barbra Streisand, Diana Ross, and Dolly Parton, proving your genius time and again. Yet, in the public eye, you're reduced to a single mocking caricature. Your artistic identity is flattened, your legacy cheapened, your incredible body of work ignored for a cheap laugh about tight pants and high voices. The year is 1997. The Bee Gees, titans of the music industry, are on a talk show couch, supposedly to celebrate a new album and their legendary career. They're professionals, veterans of 1,000 interviews, masters of the charming, easygoing story. But tonight, on live television, under the hot glare of the studio lights, something is different. The host, known for his sharp, satirical wit, is landing his jokes. The audience is laughing, but if you watch the man in the middle, the eldest brother, Barry Gibb, you can see the mask of celebrity composure start to crack. His smile is a thin, brittle line. His eyes, though, tell a completely different story. They aren't sparkling with amusement. They're holding back something deep and vast, a reservoir of hurt that's been building for decades. This isn't just frustration or annoyance. It's years of silent, suffocating pain finally rising to the surface, demanding to be seen. In just a few moments, this music legend, a man who had weathered every storm the industry could throw at him, will do something he's never done before. He will stand up, break the unspoken rules of show business, and walk away. This is the story of that moment. It's the story of the infamous interview that pushed a titan too far, and the story of why a simple walk-off became a profound act of self-respect. But to understand what happened on that stage, you first have to understand the 20 years of mockery that led to it. Before the Bee Gees were punchlines, they were pioneers. Before the jokes about falsetto and white suits, they were revered as some of the most gifted songwriters of their generation. The story of the brothers Gibb is one of staggering highs and soul-crushing lows. They began as kids, harmonizing in Manchester, their voices blending with that almost supernatural tightness only siblings can achieve. By the late 1960s, they were a global phenomenon. They weren't just writing songs, they were crafting musical epics. Tracks like To Love Somebody in Massachusetts and I've Gotta Get a Message to You were masterpieces of melody and melancholy. They were poets of heartbreak, their music rich with Baroque pop arrangements and complex emotional stories. They earned the respect of their peers, giants like the Beatles and Otis Redding, who saw in them a rare and profound talent. They were, by any measure, a first-rate act, standing shoulder to shoulder with the greatest bands of the era. Their success was built on pure, undeniable musical genius. They had already conquered the world once on their own terms, with their own sound. But then came the second act, an explosion of fame so immense it would both define and haunt them for the rest of their lives. In the mid-1970s, at the suggestion of legendary producer Arif Mardin, Barry Gibb discovered a new weapon in his arsenal, his falsetto. It started as an experiment on the song Nights on Broadway, a scream in tune that unlocked a whole new sonic universe. That discovery happened to coincide with the rise of a new sound, a new culture, a new rhythm that was taking over the world: disco. The result was Saturday Night Fever. It wasn't just an album, it was a cultural atomic bomb. The Bee Gees didn't just contribute to the soundtrack, they were the soundtrack. Songs like Stayin' Alive, How Deep Is Your Love, and Night, Fever weren't just hits, they were the heartbeat of a global movement. The album sold over 40 million copies, becoming one of the best-selling in history. The Bee Gees were no longer pop stars, they were kings, perched atop a glittering disco ball, their image, the hair, the medallions, the white suits, as iconic as their sound. For a brief, shining moment, they were the biggest band on the planet. But the higher you climb, the harder you fall. And the fall was brutal. The cultural tide turned against disco with a vengeance that was shocking in its ferocity. The disco. Suck's movement wasn't just a shift in musical taste, it was a crusade, filled with a strange, underlying rage. In 1979, that rage found its most infamous expression at Chicago's Comiskey Park during Disco Demolition Night. A crate of disco records was blown up on the baseball field, sparking a riot. It was a symbolic, violent rejection of the entire genre, and the Bee Gees, as its most visible champions, became the primary target. They became scapegoats. The same falsetto hailed as revolutionary was now a source of endless derision. Their image was lampooned as a caricature of everything supposedly wrong with the era. The jokes started, and they never stopped. Comedians, radio DJs, music critics, everyone lined up to take shots. They were dismissed as cheesy, lightweight, and out of touch. The sheer scale of their success was twisted and used as evidence. For 20 years, they took it. They were expected to smile graciously when interviewers brought it up, to laugh along with the jokes at their own expense. It was the price of fame. You take the good with the bad, the adoration with the ridicule. You grow a thick skin. And for 2 decades, the Bee Gees played their part perfectly. They were professional, charming, and self-deprecating. They absorbed. The blows answered the same condescending questions and forced a smile. But underneath, a deep and lasting wound was forming. Each joke was a small cut, another layer of pain papered over with a public smile. The pressure was immense, the hurt was real, and it was all being held in, waiting for a single moment that would make it impossible to contain. That moment would come on a BBC soundstage in 1997. The show was Clive Anderson All Talk, and the host was famous for his acerbic, intellectual brand of humor. Clive Anderson was a former lawyer, and his interview style often felt like a cross-examination, peppering guests with witty jabs. For most, it was a playful sparring match. By all accounts, the Bee Gees went into it expecting just that. They'd been hesitant to appear on the show, knowing Anderson's reputation. But producers had assured them the host was a massive fan, that this would be a respectful, celebratory conversation. They were there to promote their new album, Still Waters, a comeback record that was already a hit. It should have been a victory lap. Instead, the interview felt less like a celebration and more like an ambush from the start. Anderson came out swinging, and his targets were the same old, tired subjects of mockery. He almost immediately began making fun of their past, joking about their early band names. When Morris mentioned they were once called the Rattlesnakes, Anderson quipped, "You were probably just slow worms in those days." A small jab, easily deflected. But he didn't let up. The jibes grew more personal, more pointed. He zeroed in on the falsetto, the most ridiculed aspect of their sound, asking if they'd been working with Mickey Mouse. Barry managed a tight-lipped smile. Maurice offered a nervous chuckle. Robin, seated to Barry's right, said nothing. His face was a mask of stone. He just stared, his silence a stark contrast to the host's relentless banter. Anderson then turned to their brotherhood, a core part of their identity. "I didn't realize you were real brothers," he said. "I thought you were sisters, actually." The studio audience laughed right on cue, but on stage, the temperature was dropping. You can see it in Barry's posture. He's no longer relaxed. He's upright, tense, his body language screaming discomfort. The easygoing charm was gone, replaced by a visible, simmering frustration. The host seemed either unaware or unconcerned. He then brought up an old inside joke the brothers had about briefly calling themselves Les Tosseurs at an awards show. Anderson seized on it, turning their private gag into a public insult. With a smug grin, he declared, "You'll always be Les Tosseurs to me." This wasn't just a joke anymore, it was a deliberate act of disrespect delivered on national television. The word tosser, a crass British insult, just hung in the air. For Barry, this was a direct translation of 20 years of public perception into one crude, dismissive word. Yet he still held on. He was Barry Gibb, the leader, the stoic center of the group. He had a duty to his brothers, to the album, to the show. He tried to steer the conversation back to the music, mentioning one of their beautiful pre-disco ballads, "Don't Forget to Remember." This was the moment. This was the final straw. Anderson, instead of acknowledging the song, leaned forward and with theatrical indifference deadpanned, "I've forgotten that one." It was a small line, but it was devastating. In 5 words, he dismissed their history, trivialized their art, and invalidated Barry's attempt to bring substance to the conversation. It was the ultimate expression of contempt. As Maurice later reflected, "We don't mind being ripped apart, but don't rip the songs apart. That's something, 'cause they're like our kids. You know, you don't do that." Anderson had just done exactly that. He had taken one of their kids and told them to their face that it was forgettable. For Barry Gibb, something snapped. The dam of 2 decades of professional restraint finally broke. The forced smile vanished. A look of profound, quiet pain washed over his face, followed by a steely resolve. He had absorbed every jab about his voice, his look, his name. But the dismissal of his work, the very essence of his and his brothers' lives, was a bridge too far. He looked at Anderson, and all humor was gone. All that was left was the hurt. He turned to the host, his voice laced with a sarcasm that barely concealed his anger. "We're getting on like a storm, aren't we, Clive?" The audience's laughter faltered, sensing the shift. Barry didn't wait for a reply. "In fact," he continued, his decision made in that instant, "I might just leave." And then he stood up. It wasn't a dramatic, angry outburst. It wasn't a fit of pique. It was a moment of quiet, powerful dignity. Barry Gibb, frontman of one of the biggest bands in history, simply rose from his chair. The host, Clive Anderson, looked genuinely stunned, as if the idea of a guest refusing to endure his humor was completely foreign. "Oh, I've never had anyone walk out before," he stammered, trying to regain control. Barry didn't look at the audience or the cameras. He looked directly at the man who had spent the last several minutes chipping away at his legacy. As he turned to go, he quietly delivered his parting shot, and with that, he walked off the set. The moment was electric. The studio audience fell into a stunned silence. This was not in the script. This was real. But what happened next was perhaps even more powerful. Robin Gibb, who had been sitting in stoic, simmering silence, didn't hesitate for a second. He didn't need a cue. He simply stood up and followed his older brother. His loyalty was absolute, his support perfectly clear. A united front. Now all eyes were on Maurice, the last brother on the couch. For a fleeting moment he remained seated, a look of disbelief on his face, even managing a small, pained laugh. Anderson, desperate to salvage the segment, turned to him. "Well, you can stay," he offered weakly. But the bond between the brothers Gibb was thicker than any TV contract. Maurice glanced at the host, then in the direction his brothers had gone. The choice was already made. He got up and, without a word, walked off the stage to join them. The Bee Gees were leaving together. The image was unforgettable. 3 empty chairs on a brightly lit set. Clive Anderson was left alone, speechless, with a live audience and millions watching at home. He tried to make a joke to recover, but the damage was done. "Well, thank you to all my guests," he said into the awkward silence. "Those who stayed and those who have gone." The walkout was a rare, unfiltered glimpse behind the celebrity curtain. It was a refusal to be used as fodder for easy entertainment. Barry Gibb chose not to be a prop in his own humiliation. He didn't scream or cause a scene. His exit was defined by its quiet resolve. He simply removed himself from a situation that had become disrespectful and untenable. The power of the moment was in its restraint. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of self-preservation, and more importantly, self-respect. It was a man who had spent his entire life in the public eye, finally drawing a line in the sand. He was declaring, without shouting, that his legacy, his family, and his art were not jokes. He was taking them with him as he walked out the door. The silence that followed was louder than any hit song they had ever recorded. In the immediate aftermath, the walkout became one of the most talked about TV moments of the decade. It ignited a fierce debate. The BBC's switchboards were inundated with calls. Some viewers sided with the host, calling Barry pompous and unable to take a joke, arguing that Anderson's style was well known. But far more people rallied behind the brothers, seeing their action as totally justified. Viewers called Anderson an odious little man and praised the Bee Gees for standing up for themselves. One person wrote in, "Bring back Parky and that generation of talk show hosts who knew how to treat their guests with some respect." For these fans and for many artists, the walkout was a moment of catharsis. It was a rare instance of a major celebrity pushing back against a media culture that often treats its subjects as objects. In the years that followed, the participants themselves reflected on it. Clive Anderson eventually expressed his regret, admitting his pitch was wrong and that his jokes had crossed a line. Referring to the tosser comment, he said, "That's a bad line. Yes, it was poor, but it was only meant as a joke. That's probably the mistake I was making with the Bee Gees." It was a belated acknowledgement of the hurt he'd caused. The Bee Gees rarely spoke of it. Maurice later confirmed the experience was a letdown, especially after being assured of the host's admiration. He explained that the continuous insults felt like a setup, and that attacking their songs was the ultimate offense. Barry himself finally broke his silence in 2016. "Interviews were often based on the negative, never based on the positive," he said. "And that's one of the reasons we walked off Clive Anderson. It was just a barrage of inferred insults. I just snapped." That one word, snapped, is key. But it wasn't a snap of rage. It was a snap of realization. A realization that he didn't have to take it anymore. For decades, Barry Gibb was the stoic leader who smiled through the pain. The world saw the glamour and the fame, but they rarely saw the emotional toll. The walkout was the moment the facade crumbled, revealing the man underneath, a man with limits, who felt pain, and who had immense pride in what he and his brothers had built. The legacy of that walkout is one of strength. It redefined Barry Gibb, not as a disco relic, but as a man of substance and principle. He reclaimed his own narrative. He showed that dignity isn't something you compromise for a TV appearance. By walking away, he affirmed the value of his work and the unbreakable bond of his family. The image of Robin and Maurice following him, without question, became a powerful symbol of their lifelong unity. The story of Barry Gibb walking off live TV is more than just an infamous clip. It's a lesson in the human cost of public mockery and the quiet power of self-respect. Barry Gibb didn't need to win a war of words that night. He didn't need the last laugh. He just needed to be true to himself. By standing up and walking away, he showed the world that after decades of trying to prove his worth, he finally understood that he didn't have to anymore. The music had already spoken for itself, and his silence as he walked off that stage spoke volumes. The Bee Gees' story is one of incredible highs and painful lows, but their legacy is cemented in their timeless music. What is your favorite Bee Gees song, and what does it mean to you? Let us know in the comments below. And for more stories about the legends of music history, don't forget to subscribe. The Clive Anderson interview became a footnote in a career filled with monumental achievements, but it remains a crucial chapter in the personal story of Barry Gibb. It was the moment a man, long defined by his voice, made his most powerful statement without singing a note. He let the world see the pain he had hidden for so long, not as a moment of weakness, but as a source of quiet strength. He didn't just walk off a TV set. He walked away from the expectation that he had to endure disrespect with a smile. And, in doing so, he wasn't just defending his own honor, but the honor of his brothers, his family, and the incredible music they gave to the world. The pain in his eyes that night was real, but so was the unbreakable dignity that guided his feet. Off that stage,